So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Trevor James to start our proceedings tonight. Thanks, Trevor.
Thank you, Annette, and thank you everybody for coming. Yeah, I'm a senior resource scientist at Tasman District Council. My responsibilities are freshwaters down to wetlands, so rivers, lakes, wetlands, both ecology and the water quality. So we have identified several years ago that the Moutere had some water quality and aquatic ecology issues. We have come to know that some of those are exacerbated by lack of shading. So it's wonderful that we've got so many people ready to shade that stream, keep it cool. We have done a lot of fish surveys and surveys of invertebrate communities that tell us a big story about the health of these waterways. And so with all of that, we know what the problems are, that the Moutere has some shining stars, but generally it's a poor compared to its former self. So we know that there are some ways we manage our streams that are also not contributing well to that wellness or the modi of the Moutere catchment, such things as big rock walls and where the trees cannot shade the stream anymore, over widening, straightening streams, various things like this that have been done. A lot of history of that, but we as council recognise that there was a missing link in all of this, how the physical processes in the stream work to shape the channel, to shape the various aspects of habitat where the fish and invertebrates live. And so it was a few years ago that we cottoned on to a relatively new science in New Zealand. It's been much more established overseas, but throughout New Zealand it's still in its greater infancy, and that's the science of Fluvial Geomorphology. It's a big name, but essentially it just means how water shapes the channel and makes the homes for the animals that live in those streams. And for me as a water quality scientist, aquatic ecologist, I knew that we could manage our streams better than we have done in the past, but I didn't have an engineering background, and this fluvial geomorphology science is a real missing link. So it also forms what I think is a bridge between some of our old school engineering and ecology, brings the two together in a framework that we can work towards. So enter Mike Harvey into the mix, and suddenly we are getting right along the path to really understanding how we can work with nature rather than just randomly or even against nature in these natural processes of the water forming the channel. So just prior to Mike entering, we did a commission. This is Tasman District Council commissioned another fluvial geomorphologist to do a lot of base work, and that's from Tonkin Taylor, that report, and there's a poster that summarizes that report all on the website that you've been sent links to. So Tasman District Council really wants to help build this in the best way we can to achieve the outcomes of this group, which is a healthy river system. So Mike is now extending on that work of Tonkin Taylor, developing something that is much more able to be applied at a reach scale, your property scale, rather than a much more general sort of picture and general guidance that was left with the Tonkin Taylor report. So I think that's probably about me for now, other than that council really wants to help in this space to manage it better. As a council as a whole, we know that there's some things that we've done in the past that are not good. We're wanting to move to a much better way of doing things. So over to you, Mike, unless there's something else, Annette, you want me to cover there? You're on mute.
Yes. I just remind people that when you're not the main speaker, can you put yourself on mute? That way we don't get the interference of the sound in the background. That would be great. And so, yes, Mike, if you want to give a little bit of rundown of yourself and then get into your talk, and remember to share your screen, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I will. Thanks. I'll just put the screen up so I don't get technologically glitched. Yeah, okay. As Trevor said, I'm a fluvial geomorphologist. Theoretically, I'm retired. Spent 50 odd years working in it, most of it overseas. But I'm also the sort of stream leader for the Wecker Stream catchment group. I live over in Moutere, and we put a group together as part of this project. So I'm basically, a local in this catchment. Unfortunately, when things are interesting, it's hard to sort of step away. And really, in many ways, this takes me back to my postdoc in 1980. I got the opportunity, I did my PhD in the US, and I got the opportunity to look at a whole series of incised streams that have been straightened for flood control purposes over a period of a couple of 100 years and had pretty much come unglued. Everything was falling apart. And the real question was why? And so I essentially did a postdoc on that. We produced a book as a result of it. And that's sort of, now I'm sort of being pulled back into something that's actually very similar. And it's really interesting to go back to it. So with that, let's talk about fluvial geomorphology and why it's important to the rehab of the Moutere River catchment. And you'll see I've used very carefully the word rehab or rehabilitation rather than restoration. Restoration, I'll say it straight up front, restoration of the Moutere to what it was is impossible. It's a non-achievable goal. And I'll come back to why in a minute. Doesn't mean that what we do is unimportant, but the idea that we're going to take it back to what it was in about 1840, 1850 is just not achievable. Okay, so I want that to be sort of a bedrock of where I'm coming from. Okay. Is this thing going to advance on for me? Yeah. Whoops, there we go. All right, so what is geomorphology? It's really a fancy name. Fluvial geomorphology really comes from two words, fluvius, the Latin for river, and geomorphology essentially is the shape of the land. And what it really means is, how does this system tick? How do we understand it? Because as Trevor said, if we understand how it functions, then we have a much better chance of success working with it. But we'll only do that if we understand how it functions. And as you can see, it's all about integration. It's a systems approach. And what you'll see up there is that, the various elements of it. And to a great extent, this Moutere project is, sort of focused to a great extent on vegetation, plantings, etc. But it's only one component. And we need to figure out what part of the system that actually can make a difference to. All right, let's go back to the Moutere and why we can never take this back to where it was. About the 1840s, massive deforestation. up went the flows and up went the sediment yields as a result. But the 1860s, the New Zealand company decided to dig ditches. Why? Basically to drain the swamp that was the Moutere Valley and the smaller drainages. What did that do? Well, you dig a ditch in it, you straighten it, you increase the velocity of the flows, you also increase the amount of water that is contained in that channel, which means you kick up the energy. If you kick up the energy, the odds are it's going to erode. And that's what's happened. The early 1900s, the Moutere River was straightened, was shifted from the center of the valley out onto the northern margin. Again, gun barrel straight. Important points about channelization, increasing depth, is that not only does it drain the land, it also lowers the water table with it. And so if we're thinking about planting, and especially riparian plants, if we have an incised channel, in other words, the bed has gone down over time, then our water table has gone down with it. So we have to think about, okay, do we have a drought issue with planting on the top of the banks? Do we have to think about irrigation? Do we need to take, we just need to bear that in mind. Okay, so things weren't in such great shape by the 1930s. Over here on my side of the hill, they were actually sowing gorse because nothing else would grow, and they would burn it in the autumn and then graze it, the new growth in the spring. That's how bad things were. So the first generation of forestry went in, exotic pine plantations, and they were extensive. What happened then? Well, the peak flows dropped, and probably the sediment load dropped as well. By the 50s, the first generation of harvesting took place. The flows went up again. The sediment loads went up again. So this system has been yo-yoing over time. And then essentially we had replantation after the first logging cycle. That started to get logged again in the 2000s. Again, up went the flows and up went the sediment loading. Currently, we're seeing a lot of logging still. Rule of thumb with logging from pine trees is that if you take the pine trees off, the peak flow go up by about 30%. That's a lot. That's a big increase. So and then on top of that, we're seeing a lot of creation or conversion into urban blocks. Are you getting feedback from me, or am I just getting it from myself?
I am hearing. Can you put yourself on mute, please?
Let's see
In
what
the
happens.
bottom left corner, Jan.
You would.
Can you just put yourself on mute? Thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about the flows. This photograph, the background photograph here, was taken in November when we had the heavy rains. The top graph here is the hydrograph, is the rainfall rather, the hydrograph. And we got a lot of rain in a short period of time. We all know that. We were there. But unfortunately, the Moutere no longer has a stream, stream gauge. So we don't actually know what the flows were down in the Moutere. But over here on the Motopico, you can see the shape of the hydrograph. It's very flashy. And this is logically what happens when you ditch up a lot of your streams. Okay, the water comes down a lot faster. Even if you get the same amount of rainfall, it goes through in a shorter period of time. So your flooding goes up. And that flooding goes up, the energy goes up in the stream channels. Okay, next, we've talked, a little bit about the hydrology. Now let's talk about the sediment. You look at the top left, the picture there, and it's dirty water, brown water. But that's the fines. That's the silts and clays going out. Now they are important ecologically. They're very important out in the Moutere Inlet and further out. But they don't have a lot of impact on the dynamics of the channel. That's the fines moving through. If you look over here on the right, it's what I call the Fahey-Gita effect up in the Moutere. Essentially, things had been relatively quiet for a few years. Then we got those two big storms. And what it's done is initiated a lot of erosion of the stream banks, and we have slugs of sediment moving through. Now, this sediment is the gravel. And as it moves through, it creates a feedback because it builds up and it forces flow out against the banks. It causes more erosion on the banks, which recruits more material. So at the moment, in portions, especially in the larger streams in the Moutere, it looks like we've got a slug of sediment moving through and a sort of a reactivated, pretty highly active stream system. A lot of bank erosion going on. Okay, where's the sediment coming from? Well, now we're mainly talking about the fines. And this is work that was done for TDC, and essentially a map of the Moutere, and where the various locations down the Moutere, what is the primary source of that fine sediment? Well, if you look at the little pie charts, basically most of it's coming out of bank erosion. The green, it's coming out of forestry. Now, Trevor tells me that a lot of the stuff that's probably coming out of, is mapped as coming out of bank erosion, is also the result of sedimentation that occurred post-forestry as well. So it's a sort of a combined effect. But the net result is that if you look at the top right, this is what the bed of the Moutere Inlet should look like. It should be gravel. Little bit of mud here and there, but mainly gravel. If you look at the bottom, this is what it looks like out at the end of Wecker Road. Basically, we've got 300 to 400 mils of mud sitting on top of the gravels. And most of that has come in from the catchment. Basically, land use changes in the catchment over time. Okay, the other component of all of this is the channelization. And it was done on many scales. The top left picture there is the Moutere itself, where the cursor is, and obviously long straight ditch, about 10 miles of it. But it was also done at very small scales. Here on the bottom right, you see a valley floor, which is just over the back from us actually. And it's actually channelized twice. There's a channel, a dug channel on both sides of the valley. And if you look at these small laterals coming in, a lot of them are dead straight too. So channelization took place on many scales within the Moutere. Now, this is just a conceptual model, and it's actually the conceptual model that came out of the postdoc work I did, nearly 40 years ago. But what it really is allows you to understand the temporal and spatial relationships between channelization and the reaction of the streams. So if we start up at the top here, we have a natural stream channel. It has a low bank, periodically, it's sinuous, it's just like the Moutere. It gets channelized. In other words, it forms a ditch, straightened up. the bank height increases. The amount of flow that stays in that channel is quite a bit more than it was above. It starts to erode. It goes down vertically. The bed drops out. As the bed drops out, the bank height goes up. In other words, banks get taller. And eventually, that bank height exceeds the ability of the bank to support itself. So it fails mechanically. And you look through the Moutere, you see lots of places where there are big bank slides, big scarfs have come out of the banks. That's basically generally when the critical height for the bank has been exceeded. But as it does that, the channel starts to widen out. And you see the way these arrows go. As it widens, obviously more and more material is being taken out of the old floodplain. But as it widens, the sediment transport capacity for a given flow goes down. So we start to get accumulation of material in the bed. Over time, what happens then is a new floodplain forms naturally at a lower elevation, and it's in balance with the flows and the sediment load. In essence, that is a model that we can apply, a conceptual model we can apply to the Moutere. So let's look at it. Remembering that cartoon, if you like, I just showed you. So here's up the top. This is the company ditch up near the Lower Moutere. Here is the top above any channelization. And you've got a very small stream channel up on top left here. We come downstream and we see a head cut in here. This is where the bed is lowering as a result of a base level lowering from essentially channelization. It's working its way upstream. So if we come further down, you see a bigger channel. Further down to the center here, a larger channel, an even larger one farther downriver. So those same processes are all going on in the Moutere. Now, a lot of these ditches, here's one that's just down below Davy Road. It is the company ditch. This was dug, and it was 1.8 meters wide when it was dug. Today, it's sort of 6 to 10 meters wide. That gives you some idea of just how much bigger it has become over time. Now, the other problem is that even though you dig a channel, there are tributaries. And if the bed of the main stem goes down, then the tributaries have to follow it down as well. And we see plenty of that throughout the Moutere. Here's a classic. This is the Moutere River out in the background here, and this is a tributary coming in. And you can see how the bed is cut down. To save the bridge, the engineers have had to come in and put a grade control structure in. We see on the main Moutere channel, here's an old weir. The height of the channel downstream, or the banks, compared to upstream is quite dramatic. If we were to lose that weir or that grade control, we'd be in trouble. Essentially, that degradation would move all the way on upstream. And that happens at a lot of different scales in the Moutere. Just happens to be a small side stream. And this is the road culvert, bridge crossing. And you can see below the concrete sill here, there's quite a drop. There's probably 300-400 mil drop across that. That is what is providing stability to the stream upstream of the bridge. If these bridges go out, then we've got another mechanism to reactivate the Moutere. It's important in the Moutere to make the determination, is the problem you're looking at systematic or is it local? And this really governs how we would address it, how we would deal with it. Here on the left is the company ditch, and it's eroded. We're looking downstream, and the bed, essentially the head cut or a neck point, is moving upstream as they got a waterfall, a plunge pool here, and you've got eroding banks downstream. Now, there's no point in just coming in here and trying to plant or fix this. This is on its way, it's on a trajectory, okay? To stop this process, you've got to halt that head cut. So bed stabilization is also an important component of this, not just bank stabilization. The other side of the coin is this picture on the right. Now, this happens to be an eroding bank. There's no real evidence here that there is vertical instability in the channel. What's happening is, there has been, the bank's pretty high. That, bank height is well over 2 meters. And so this is a local problem. This is a systemic problem. This is a local problem. Okay, now Trevor talked about the study that Tonkin and Taylor did. What they did is they went through and they classified the streams in the Moutere. And this map here essentially has their classification. Everything that's the same color is the same in the same box, if you like. They made 8 boxes, and everything fits into one of 8 boxes on that. And so that is a good inventory of what is out in the Moutere at the moment. But it's not a basis for design. Okay, so this is probably the statement here, which says, if we don't have a basis of design, every project is a one-off and we never learn from either success or failure. So we need to know what it is we're trying to achieve, and then we learn from that. If it worked, great. We know why. If it didn't work, well, we know then. We know not to do it again. We learn from it. This is one of the things we'll be sort of coming back to you as landowners in the Moutere is, what have you done? What's worked? What hasn't worked? We need sort of validation of where we're going to from a sort of an analytical point of view. And your experience is going to be critical to that. So basically, this is the Tonkin and Taylor classification. Here's the 8 boxes. And every stream segment in the Moutere has been classified as according to one of these classes. The map is available. Trevor has in fact changed the terminology a little bit in terms of the classification on the poster they developed explaining this project. And I think it makes it a little bit more understandable. There is sort of conflation of some stuff in here. And what I'll say is this first one, this artificially straightened channel. Now, as I've just shown you going through, all scales of channels have been straightened, okay? So it's not just a, one class of channel. Multiple channels have been straightened at different sizes. And we have to understand where they're going before we can really apply this. So, classification and design. Classification is something that we can all use to talk about. We can say, yep, this is in box number 3. And we all know then what we're talking about. But it's not a basis for design. And so what we've got to do is figure out how to progress what's been done, the systematic inventory that Tonkin and Taylor did. We need to, how do we progress that? Okay. Well, the one thing that we don't do is this. And again, I'm on my hobby horse. There is a tremendous amount of chatter out in all sorts of areas about streams. and stream restoration, about reference reaches. And in simple terms, I've got two examples here. Up on the top left here, this happens to be a channel in Mississippi in the southeastern United States. The old historic channel is sinuous and up here on the bank. And this is the straightened channel. This too was dug as a small channel, and it's probably about 5 meters deep, and it was dug about 1 meter and a bit deep. Today, it was about 3 or 4 meters wide. In places now, this is over 50 meters wide. So it's a canyon, if you like. You are not going to take this canyon back to this stream. It is not physically possible, okay? Similarly here on the right, this is the Moutere. You can see over on the left here, you see these very sinuous old meanders. And you see this stream, the modern stream down the middle here, which is a lot straighter. That is not, the old form is not an appropriate form for the modern channel. Why? Because the flows have changed, the sediment loads have changed, the vegetation has changed. This is where we can't go back to that. You can dig that, you can make it, but it's not sustainable. It will not be self-maintaining. So we need to think about this and say, okay, how do we improve this? And so it's going to be somewhere between this and that. All right, there is a way of doing this. NIWA has a very extensive database for all streams in New Zealand and watersheds. Call it the REC2 database. And I've been working with Trevor's associate, Craig, and his intern, Ella, to try and mine this database. And essentially, back in the mid-50s, a US academic developed what was called stream ordering. And I'll show it to you here. It's actually very simple. So basically, if you start at the top of the watershed, let's find an easy one. Yeah, here's a good one here. So the first link in the system is a first order. And where two first orders come together, you get a second order. And then when two second orders come together, you end up like down in here, you get a third order. Two third orders come together, it's a fourth order. So it's essentially, it's an exponential system. It's a fairly good way of physically describing energy and form in stream systems. And so we can then also mine into the NIWA database. And for each one of these segment types, we can develop a measure of the energy in the stream. We call that unit stream power. And it's a pretty simple calculation. It's essentially a flow, which is Q, times a slope. And the discharge and slope is energy. And you divide it by the stream width, and that unitizes it across all streams. If you don't have, good hydrology, you can use the drainage area above the point as a surrogate for discharge. But we're fortunate that we actually do have regional hydrologic relations, and we can use those. So let me show you where we've got to so far. This is essentially a plot of, these are the stream orders, smallest stream to the largest stream. The largest stream in the Moutere is about a fifth order, okay? And then this is the unit stream power, the average unit stream power for each of these classes. And it's doing what we would expect it to do. Essentially, the headwaters, the smaller streams, have steep slopes and relatively small amounts of flow. As you come down system, the slope flattens out and the flow doesn't increase that much. So the second order ones tend to have the lowest energy. And then the flow starts to build up because the contributing area increases, even though the slope is starting to go down, until finally you hit about the fourth order streams. And that's where you've got the maximum energy. And then they drop off again as you go further down. Now, if we can correlate, we go back now. Sorry, just get to where we are. Here we go. If we can correlate that with these mapping units that were developed by Tonkin and Taylor, then at any given location, we can provide you, the landowner, with a reasonable estimation of the energy that's in your stream segment. And that then starts to give us a real basis for design. Now, there's a lot of work being done around the world. And this is sort of a summation of it, and I'm not going to spend too much time on it. But essentially what it says is that these are linings you can have for channels, and these are what are referred to as limiting velocities. And bottom line is that if you're in the green, it's pretty good. And this is the range from about 0.6 meters per second up to greater than 2.4. If you get into the yellow, be careful, and red, you've essentially gone out beyond where you're capable, where this technique or technology can prevent erosion. So we have at least some documentation and some standards that we can start applying in the Moutere. Okay, so having said all of that, what are our goals? And this is really, I'm focused on the riparian plantings. Stabilization and sediment reduction is one, and then shading, filtering, and providing habitat is, on the other side. Okay, so you look at a stream like this and say, well, can we do it? Obviously, it's been pretty successful over here on the right. So we need to really give ourselves a conceptual way of looking at each of our streams, each one of us. And I'm sort of giving it to you in this sort of triangular form. So there are three components to this. There is the flooding frequency. In other words, how often does the stream come out of bank at your place? If it's very frequent, and then you've got high flooding frequency, moderate, low. If it's low, you've probably got a very big channel, and so you've got a lot of energy in that channel. If it's floods frequently, on an annual basis, or maybe more frequently, you've got a pretty small channel. And you're unlikely to have a lot of energy in it. So that's the first cut. The next thing to look at is the stability of the bank. Okay. Now, really, is it stable or is it unstable? And when I say that, I'm not talking about a local effect where the flows are coming in and just eroding the bank. I'm talking about, is it stable from a mass perspective? In other words, are you seeing big chunks of it breaking off and sort of landsliding out? That's pretty critical, differentiation. That's the height of the bank, essentially. And then the other axis on here is the stability of the bed. So basically, where it's stable, the amount of sediment, and this is the coarser sediment, this is the sand and gravels, equals the capacity of the stream to transport it. In other words, what comes in more or less goes out, and you don't get either the bed going down or the bed going up. The inverse to that is twofold. You either have more sediment coming in than, that's the lower one here, than the stream can transport, and that's where the bed builds up again and starts to put pressure on the banks. Or you can have the other side of it where there isn't enough sediment compared to the amount of energy in the system, and the bed drops out. It's continuously eroding. So for you individually, simplistically, we can sort of say, if we are in this sort of range here, where, yeah, we flood, fairly frequently to moderately, we don't have big high banks. Basically, sediment that comes in is more or less what goes out. Then in this range here, we can probably do anything with planting successfully. And our planting objectives will be shading, there will be habitat, and there will be some stabilization of the channel, but it won't be the primary goal. If we plot up in this area here, then we've got a mess. We've got a channel that's very unstable, and I'll guarantee you, planting vegetation on it isn't going to work. It wasn't so long ago I talked to somebody in the Moutere who had this last winter planted a lot of plants to stabilize banks, and the November floods took it all out. One flood took their whole winter's worth of planting out. It was in the wrong place, basically. And that's why it's really important to know what's going on at your property. And then in terms of sort of the bed stability, well, are you seeing a big buildup of gravel? Are you seeing the bed dropping down through time? Or does the bed sort of more or less just move along and it's pretty much in balance? If we're out in this zone here, then we're dealing with a big stream, and plantings alone aren't going to do it. Regardless, even if it's just a local problem, it's going to need some help. And I'll show you some slides of that. Okay, so let's look at some successful riparian plays. These are probably Strela order 2 streams. They're small, they're very successfully planted and stabilized. If you look down on the right-hand side one, obviously there's been some pretty good floods through here. Here's the flood debris sitting up on the fence line here. And it stood up, there's habitat in there, there's shading in there. There are native plants that are putting the right sort of organic matter into it. And I'm parroting now what I've learned from Trevor. Basically, biology is not my thing, but I'm learning. So these are sort of examples of very successful riparian planting. Okay, here's some what I would call biostabilization candidates. The banks aren't that high. It's reasonably wide. You probably can come in and plant here. The one thing you have to worry about here is that this is the area up in the northwest corner of the watershed where it's essentially draining granites. And so these soils are very sandy, and so they're probably droughty. So the water table has come down, and so you might have to think, if you're planting these, you might want to think about irrigation to get them going, because they're probably going to dry out otherwise. If you look here on the right, and interestingly enough, this is one side of the road bridge, the culvert, looking upstream, and this is looking downstream on the same stream. And you see here it's much deeper, but all is not lost. You see this line of broom growing on the banks in there. That's probably a pretty good indication that you can put plants in down to about that level and have them succeed. Mother Nature is a pretty good designer. And that's sort of Mother Nature type design and picking up the signals that the energy below that is probably too high to get woody plants to stay in there. But above that, it's probably okay. Sorry, let's go back one. All right, these two, there's 4 photographs here. They're all relatively small streams. There's not a lot of instability with them. So it would make sense, you know, you can plant them. You have a reasonable setback, but you don't have too much of a setback. You haven't got a lot of lateral meandering that would take your fence out if you did fence out there. You get pretty good response in terms of shading on the streams. These are small streams and they're probably amenable to planting, and they're probably damn good, really the best candidates for it. These are poor candidates. Here on the left, this is the company ditch where it's eroding up. This is going to keep widening. The bed's going to keep going out. Planting this on itself is not going to work. And the best thing that can be done here is to put in a grade control structure here to stop this migrating upstream. And then you probably, it's a fairly small stream, and above that you could plant it. But if you come in close here, you know, this fence is going to come out before it's much older because this channel is widening because the bed has gone down. Here on the right, you can see that same process going on. The bed's going down, the channel's widening out. It would not be a good place to be planting, not if you want success. And then finally, here on the bottom left, this is the Moutere ditch itself, or the Moutere River. It's huge. You know, planting this, even if you had very large non-native trees on there, doesn't produce much shading. It's just too big. The amount of energy that's in this stream or in this river channel is very, very high. Now, it doesn't mean you can't get some plantings along them. You can, and in fact, there's quite a lot of rock riprap that's been placed in, bank protection that's been placed in over the years along here. And it's surprising actually how much vegetation actually grows up through it. And that could be managed, because the other problem with having a lot of vegetation growing in these streams is that it cuts down the amount of flow that can be accommodated within the channel, and it increases the flood risk. And so that's why essentially the flood management engineers don't like plants in channels, basically. But if you pick the right channel, if you manage them, if you prune them up so you have trunks and not really sort of dense thickets, then it can be done. You know, it's an accommodation. Okay, here's an example of some biostabilization that was done on the Moutere. This is Bosselmann Creek. And you can see along here, these are, I think Trevor told me the other day, these are Mazodana willows that were planted. Up behind is where the bank was cut back at a lower angle. And you can see in this segment here, which is dead straight, it's worked. These plants are growing well. There's no erosion up behind. Things are sort of slowing down. But the moment you go into the bendway down below here, where the energy changes, this has overwhelmed the vegetation. Essentially, it's been eroded out. So even the local changes in energy are pretty critical. So how do we get around a lot of all of this? Well, we have to work with the river engineers, basically, the river stabilization engineers. This is Bosselmann Creek a little further up, and then I believe up on, it escapes me, but one of the other streams, there are a number of head cuts going up through there. That is the head cut or the instability, and essentially it's moving upriver. That's got to be stopped. Otherwise, we just have a system that continues to feed on itself. You know, we can't stabilize the banks if the bed is still going down. I mean, that's the bottom line. You see this here on the right as well, where the instability is working its way up and is being held. You know, this is the sort of thing that we would have to put in over here on the left. Okay, this is what I was talking about in terms of mass failure. Here you can see a sort of a landslide. The bank collapses, high banks. that needs mechanical assistance. When a bank is that high, there's no way you're going to stabilize it either by just cutting in the angle back or trying to plant vegetation on the top of it. Rule of thumb, from a bank stability point of view, the effectiveness of plants put on the top of the bank is only as deep as the roots go. So if the roots only go down sort of maybe a meter, half a meter down the bank, then it doesn't have any impact essentially on the overall stability. But there are ways of getting around this. And it's a sort of a combination stabilization. And this is just a series of hard points that have been built, groins out of rock, but they've been vegetated. And you look at right onto the headward onto this one, and you can see vegetation growing in them and around them and between them. This is a really good combination where you need mechanical assistance. The other thing that's important here is that these hard points create local scour around them, and that's important for essentially fish habitat. It provides pools. So you're getting both a vegetation benefit and a sort of an in-channel benefit. Here's another example where instead of, like they have done in many places in the Moutere, putting rock from the toe right to the top of the bank, they've just put it in on the toe and then planted it in between it. You can let the top just work back and it will vegetate itself. So in other words, in these high energy situations, you can't do it on your own, or you can't, sorry, what I meant to say there was that vegetation alone can't do it, but you can use some form of combination. You don't have to go from the toe to the top with rock. You can be, a little more gentle about it. And by putting plants down at this level, then you start, even in a big stream, you start to get some shading effect on the water, and you get vegetation in much closer contact to the water, rather than cutting it all the way back on a 3-on-1 batter and sort of planting stuff further and further away from the stream. The other thing that I might add in here with these bigger streams too, is that, I think a lot of us are really focused on natives. On the whole, natives tend to be fairly slow growing. And frankly, from my perspective and on my property here, I've got a mix of natives and non-natives. The non-natives grow pretty quickly and they provide shelter for a lot of the natives. And eventually, if you want to, you can take out the non-natives as the locals go. So I don't think we need to be purists. I think there are some real advantages in interplanting with non-natives, but I'll leave that one to Trevor, really. That's just a very personal opinion. Okay, so let's wrap this up.
That diversity, our native species have adapted to native vegetation, and so it is important. Natives are very, very important, but a certain amount of non-native is not going to take away from that. It's just if the non-native was, say, more than a third of that overall vegetation in your climax situation, it would be start to impact on the native ecology.
All right, thank you, Trevor. Okay, so sort of to wrap this up, what this is really about to me is trying to learn from your experiences. I have if you like, a sort of an engineering viewpoint of where I want to go with this, or how we can advance it. But we need feedback, and we need sort of calibration and verification from what people have done. And so what we would like is feedback from people in terms of, on your stream, what have you observed over time? What's happening? That's the people who've been living there for a while. That's the best record we've got, essentially. Has the bed been stable? Has the bed been going down? Has it been coming up? Has the stream been widening? If we could get that information and get a timeline on it, then it gives us, it's really useful information to us. Secondly, we'd like to know what you've done. Has it worked? Or are you disappointed with it? You know, like one of the landowners talking to us not so long ago, did a lot of work over the winter, planted and lost it all. That's very disappointing, but it's an important data point for us in terms of validating where we're going with this. Again, we'd like to know where it was and when. And then, you know, if you did something that didn't work, that's important too. Just because it didn't work isn't a, you know, you might think of it as a local failure, but in terms of the system, it tells us stuff. It tells us what we can do successfully under what circumstances. So really what we're trying to, what I'm sort of pitching to you is, can we get your feedback? Can we get your knowledge? Can we sort of encapsulate that knowledge into where we're headed with progressing the TDC funded study? So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah.
We do have a question from Fiona, and feel free everyone to take your things off mute and ask some questions. But Fiona's first question is, if you do have a stream that's showing instability and it's moving upwards, how do you stop it?
Well, essentially, you're going to have to go, I mean, I can give you a technical answer to that. You put a grade control structure in. It's an engineering structure. It's not, you know, they're not that difficult to design. To design them correctly so that they allow for ecological sort of values as well is a little bit more taxing, but can be definitely be done. But the bottom line is you've got to put a hard point into the system to stop it moving further up.
Thank you.
Listed examination travel in a straight line up the staircase through the ceiling.
I'm struggling a bit. I think there might be some background noise. Has anybody else got some questions? When I was listening to your talk, you know, you were talking about those small little waterfalls as an indicator that this stream bed is dropping. And can we actually put little structures in there that will help stop that?
Yeah, yes, we can. I mean, I've built some on my place very simply. Built them out of old fence posts, basically. They're easy, you know, if it's a small stream, you can hand build them. You don't even need a digger. I dug mine in with a, you know, a pick and a shovel, basically. They're pretty easy to build and design and build. You know, they're not difficult at all. It's when you get into the bigger streams, then it's an engineering project. But then that's something that I think I would be going to whoever is responsible for the stream channels and saying, let's talk, basically. And that's, I presume that's TDC, who have river maintenance authority and responsibility.
We didn't talk much about how to reinstate the meanders into the stream. I know that this is something Trevor's very keen on. Trevor, have you had some experience in recreating meanders in streams?
Well, in Richmond, there's Bork Creek, and that has been very successful. It does have quite a wide flood channel. It's quite engineered. It's been in place now since 2015, so nearly six years, and it has worked. So why meanders are important is because unlike a straight stream, meanders have much more diversity of depth and width. You have steeper on the outside of the bend and pools on the outside of a bend. You get different hydraulic zones, some faster water, some slower. That's why meanders are important. Yeah, I think in some of the flashier parts of the Moutere, it's going to be a challenge to reconstruct those meanders, and I would take Mike and people of his qualification to help design that. Absolutely.
If I could sort of chip in there, I think you need a very clear understanding of what it is you want, and really understand what the consequences of that are. You can develop a meandering planform from a straight channel if you're prepared to move enough dirt. But in general, you have to there's a fork in the road here, a philosophical fork in the road. And one side of it is what I would call Disney World, and the other is reality. One is, I like the look of a meandering stream, but I don't want to deal with the consequences of it. That's Disney World, because that way you meander it, you rock the outside of the bends, you fix that form spatially through time. It gives you a meandering planform. You can design that. It will give you some variability, but it is static. It's designed to be static, because the consequences of it not being static is that you have to deal with erosion and deposition. In other words, you have to be prepared to give the stream a corridor that's wide enough to be able to erode and deposit. And you have to be also aware of the fact that when you erode a bank, it's only the coarse material that comes out of that bank that more or less stays in the stream. The fines, the silts and clays, wash downriver. So if you have a fine sediment problem downstream in your receiving waters, then you might want to think twice about whether you want an actively meandering stream. The other thing that you need to think about is that if you are going to have an actively meandering stream, then you have to also accept the fact that it will erode and deposit. It will erode out some of the plants that you've put in. You know, it's a dynamic system, and I think you have to make a real choice about meandering streams, reconstructing meandering streams. It's not as simple as just building them. You have to think about it in the longer term.
I think why Bork Creek was so successful is it's a very wide corridor. There's plenty of room for those big flood flows to flood out over the flood plain. You're on mute.
Sorry, there's rock and stuff in there too.
Not in Bork Creek, no.
Okay.
But it's on the Waimea Plain, so it's a 70-meter wide corridor with a low flow channel of about 2 meters. So
Yeah.
plenty of room. Yeah.
So anyhow, I mean, I think you just need to, when you talk about meandering streams, I think you need to think your way through it in space and time and what the consequences are.
Anyone have any comments about what's happening in their stream? So you've listened to the talk. Can you now, you can recognize some of these things in your own streams? Jan, you've been watching streams in around your neck of the woods for a very long time. What have you observed? Just click on the lower bottom and unmute yourself, Jan.
Yeah. Well, we've actually got quite a few of those things that Mike's talked about. A little waterfall at one stage about 1 to 2 meters high, and we thought we'd fix it by smoothing it out. Well, it lasted about a month, and next thing we've got this waterfall going back upstream, just as if we never looked at it. So we've left it to work its own way back, and it's actually going quite well. And we've planted probably too close at some of the places, but on the other hand, the non-natives, which probably will cut out, or somebody will cut out later, have really stabilized most of the bank, particularly some of the steeper cuts. Yeah, so I think I've got a few ideas from what you've been telling us, Mike. Okay, a lot more, but that'll do. Okay,
Barbara,
next person.
Yeah, Barbara, how long have you been living where you are? Bottom left, unmute. Barbara, you still haven't unmuted yourself?
Oh, here we go.
Excellent.
Yes. Okay. Well, my son actually owns the property, but my husband and I, we've looked after it for like 20 years. We have a very nice creek that runs through, but we've also got a big pond, and it tends to accumulate a lot of gravel and sediment, and what did you say? Mud. And mud, from which would be really good if we could stop that somehow. Because we have to, sometimes we've got to get the somebody to come in and clean it all out for us, you know, and that, at the moment we've got a lot of weed as well. So we're going to have to, there's quite a lot to be done. But our creek is in reasonably good order. It doesn't cave in a lot, and we've had a flood once that we know of in the last 20 years.
So that would be a great place to do some planting.
Wonderful. And there is that, in the last Zoom we did, we had where you can make a trap. I've forgotten the name of it now, but it was like it catches a lot of your silt and stuff on the way down, and stops it from flowing on. I'd like to build one of those. I've forgotten the name of it now. A sediment trap.
The sediment trap.
Be very good if we could build that before.
Fiona, what's yours? Yeah, excellent. Fiona, what's the state of your creek? Remember to unmute yourself.
Yep, have done. I've actually only got 50 meters, and the downstream end goes under the bridge of the actual road. And after listening tonight, I actually have steep sides, and so I've done the planting, of course, on the tops of those sides. The sides themselves can't be planted. Does this mean it's going to widen and collapse? Is what I'm now querying, and if it does, what's the solution and whose responsibility? So I've kind of got a little bit of confusion going on there. Yeah, but the stream itself's fine, but it does keep collapsing those sides down when we get flooded out in November. Yeah.
It'd be really good to see some photographs. It's pretty hard to, I guess Mike would say the same, to speak in theory. I mean, our river engineers do provide a service provided. I think most of the Moutere is river Y rating district, so there's a 50% contribution from the landowner. So you're best to talk to them, either Giles or Rick. But yeah, I think that I'm trying to work with Giles and Rick to try and make sure what is done has also got ecological benefits. So that's all about our challenge in the space. And I'm seeing more and more that we can have our cake and eat it with this. But we just need, as Mike said, a basis for design. We can't just sort of go ahead randomly. We need to collect the type of information that Mike's talking about and be more scientific about our approaches. This missing bit of the puzzle that we haven't been using. This is our river engineers haven't been using. It's fluvial geomorphology.
Thanks.
I mean, if I could
Anyone
put a
else?
pitch in, if you have photographs, you know, even if you just sort of flick them in an email, location, time, when it was, if you could get them to Annette or to Trevor or even to me, you know, this would be, and if you would let us come and have a look at it on the ground, I'd be happy to come. I really would. You know, as I said, one of the advantages of being retired.
Okay, thank you.
Play on things like these.
Yeah. Can I add a bit? Jan? Shall I go ahead?
Yes.
Since the logging has been done in the head of the Supplejack Valley, we've had a lot more, as you'd expect, a lot more flash flooding and sediment loading. And one of the things is it comes down onto the property and turns a fairly sharp right-hand turn. And that's where I need some sort of armoring, not all the way up, but just at the crucial point where the current hits the bank. And then I've been planting flaxes fairly close, just in the hopes they don't get swiped off. But the armoring still is needed just to deflect or lessen the impact of the water. Okay. I'll finish.
I'm sorry, the Supplejack Valley, that's the one I was trying to remember. I have been told that there is quite a bit of vertical instability in there. I would really like to come up and have a look at it.
Okay. I'll get Martin Heine will be able to liaise with you, I'm sure.
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody else got any questions to ask about their stream or?
I've seen some photographs. That sounds a very good idea.
Yep. Patricia, Steve, you've been incognito. Do you have any questions you want to ask?
No, actually, I think we're pretty good. We've had the pleasure of Mike Harvey already visiting us with Elliot. He's had a look at the low power screen and by his stuff, and we're going to get. I'm going to come and visit and show us. So thank you, Mike. We have actually got the riparian fencing in taking place at the moment. So we're actually pretty maxed out on just keeping up with them, doing the earthwork, preparing the land for them, but it's been working really well. So I think we're in a pretty sort of exciting position. For those who don't know our land, we're at the top end of any catchment. So we're the beginning of the water chain, so to speak. We have some ex-forestry of about I don't know, I'm going to say 15, 20 years ago. The grass there has stabilised the streams to a reasonable extent so that when we do get floods, they are holding together. However, the lower half of our property, and for complexes of about 100 acres, the lower part of that was deforested in just 5 years ago. It was slashed just 2 years ago, and we're in sort of source control and grooming management. But it does mean that I've really enjoyed the talk. The stages in that are very clear, and I can see where we're at. The lower ones are in a raw situation where they are susceptible to erosion and sucking. But if we're at land and this project and with the advice we're getting means that we are able to be in a position to be proactive, involved, and I think doing very much what the project is seeking to achieve for our part. So I think we're good. What we've done with our riparian fencing is we have made sure that there's enough room to move inside so that we know that we've got 3 years of serious grass and care from many trees, but we make it such that we can get machines inside. And as part of where we're at now, we've been able to mulch it and make it easy to access and easy to work. So we're going to give you a praise here when we're at. We didn't particularly have a question because of the people that have been helpful to us, obviously Elliot and Mike, and actually in the dark and distant past, Trevor, you have influenced the start of our journey, so thanks for that. And yeah, we think we're in a good place, and it's been very important to support for the basic. That's it. Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
I'll go on mute now. Thank you.
Johannes. Unmute yourself, lower left.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting to listen to the talk. Where we are located is basically on the Moutere ditch on the Hewitson property. So the river, which is basically on our neighbor's property, and we are sort of owning basically half of the bush on our piece of land, and the other half of it is sort of belongs to a new neighbor, and he also sort of owns that river there. But I'm always quite concerned about that river and about the planting and basically the possibilities basically to bring it back to better conditions. We are here for 30 years, so we've got a lot of knowledge what as far as flooding goes and water tables and that sort of thing. And I'm more than happy sort of to pass that one on. But in the end, for me, it's basically trying to convince the neighbor, and the properties at the moment for sale again. So I don't know who is going to buy it and what's going to happen to it. But I'm definitely sort of looking after our bush block and replanting that. And we've got in winter quite a sort of high, high water table. So we get flooding through the property. We've got a lot of cicadaceas and that sort of trees in there. And we planted probably 2,000 trees over the years. But it still needs more trees because the bush block as it is just too small to do its job on its own. So in summer when it gets really dry, there's not much topsoil and it really sort of dries out and all the new seedlings sort of basically dying off. And so it's a lot of, so we just have to extend basically the bush line and yeah, and trying sort of to get the natural sort of habitat going back again. But I mean, over the 20 years we are here, or 30 years we are here, and the bush has changed big ways. And so it's I'm really happy with that, but it's a really slow process. And I wouldn't have imagined that when we started that, sort of keeping the animals out and replanting, because I mean, there was just a variety of lots of seeds on the ground. And my fear was really, I mean, if we leave the animals out in a few years' time, everything is sort of back to a good ground cover. But that actually didn't really work like that. And it's quite a long and slow process. And but as I said, I mean, I know all the areas, the different spots, and what to plant best. And so it's a matter of getting basically the trees in and trying to do what I want to do. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Is it Anna? Is it?
Hi.
Hi.
Well, I find that our meeting last week was a bit similar, what we talked about, to what it is today. But I chose to listen it today because it was so helpful, the last one. So I thought maybe I'll rehear it, and also maybe I'll find something new just between the lines. So I really have to thank you, both lecturers, Mike and Stephen, about their lecture. I learned a lot. I couldn't understand the structure. Why is the structure of the stream is like that? And it all made clear now. And I know how to look at it and how to treat it. So I'm thankful. Also, the little tip that I had last week with putting stones under the waterfall worked beautifully. The minute that, one day after I put some stones under the waterfall, the water became clearer, because all the time the water, they were muddy and it was touching the mud. And then suddenly I could see the color of the water, thanks to the stones underneath the waterfall. So with that, I'm very, very positive to follow the instructions or the theory that I heard and do exactly what's been told now. That's it, and I'm positive. I'm very thankful.
Thank you. Are there any other last comments or questions? can I just ask everybody, I've struggled, I've had really bad internet all evening and I'm worrying about what the recording was like. Is that just something that was unique to me, or did other people have the same thing?
It was good most of the time.
Okay, so it's just me. Well, that's excellent. I'll listen to the recording and see how clear it was.
Yeah, for me, it was pretty much all the time pretty good.
Can I just ask a little question while we're talking? On Serrao, at Serrao, I left my email in regards to the fencing. Should I wait for a long time, or what were others contacted already about their fence?
I was talking to Elliot today. He only works 3 days a week.
Okay.
So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But yeah, he will be contacting you about fencing.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, if you want to learn more about this, Trevor's poster is on our website, as is the 100-page report. And you'll be very pleased to know, Trevor, I was talking to Mel, who's running the community nurseries, and she had sat and read that whole report. It's about 100 pages, so I was very impressed. And her argument was, if she was teaching the kids, she needed to know all this stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's a
So
bit of a heavy
yes,
read,
there is
and a
a
bit
very,
technical language, but well done. Yeah.
yeah. So thanks to both Mike and Trevor for all the work that you're doing on this, and you've had an offer to, if you're worried about your stream and want some input, that Mike will come and have a look, which is an amazing offer. So yeah, take that up if you want to, and I'm sure Hugh and Trevor will be continuing to work on this particular aspect of the river, and hopefully we'll be able to integrate that with our planting plans. And yeah, just take care where you put your plants. And yeah, it's been a fascinating journey for me to hear about all of this stuff as well. And it's all about looking at the river differently. Things that are coming up. We've got a talk coming up on Saturday about climate change and how that might affect the catchment and Tasman. And that'll be in the local Upper Moutere Hall. There'll be a flyer coming out about that shortly. And then later on in the month, we're going to have Is Your Stream Healthy workshop located at 3 different places throughout the catchment. So this is where we can actually go and look at the things that are living in the stream and see if the stream's healthy. And then you'll be able to go home and have a look at your own streams. So watch the space. Barbara was finding a date and some venues for that, and then we'll advertise that. That'll be coming up. And hopefully, Trevor, will have once we know a potential date, we'll see if there's anybody from TDC who can help. Otherwise, I'll fill in my limited capacity. I'll struggle through.
We're just taking a round of invertebrate samples right across the district, so we can look at those really detailed analyzed samples with those that are taken on those days. Many of them will be nearby, I'm sure, those field days that you're running.
Oh, that'll be brilliant. It's always good to have the data to compare things with. Excellent. So is there anything else in the last, before we stop, that anyone wants to bring up? No? Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And this hopefully will be shortly posted on our website. So you can tell other people about it, and they can get a chance to listen to it as well. And good luck with getting all your planting plans and things done. I think some of you have already completed planting plans. You don't have to do it again, but before you pick up the plants for the next planting, you must have submitted a planting plan. So, Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Annette, I'll send you the PDF of that.
That'll be great.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. It was great. Have a good night.